not being taught to fully shoulder roll, how long would they give it before they think, okay, I don't have the reflexes to do this, especially with that low lead hand, that shoulder roll?
I'm probably gonna know relatively quick. Um, it just depends how much time I have to work with that person. Like if I get a kid at 8 years old, I mean, I got 10 years before he turns professional. I got a long time to try to develop it if I think that it's something he can learn. But if I'm working with a guy who's already an active professional and he's not picking it up right away, then I'm probably going to leave it alone and just focus on what he's good at. It all depends on how much time I have with that particular athlete and what his natural inclinations are, his natural tendencies are. I'm going to pay attention to that during his sparring. So it just depends. But one thing I will say is, I think there's levels to guys who do the shoulder roll. So for instance, me, I could do the shoulder roll, but I'm not going to try to shoulder roll against a top level guy if I get in the ring with him, right? Like I might do the shoulder roll against a guy I feel that I could do it with, but there's certain guys that I know I ain't trying that shit with him. So I think there's levels of your opposition. So for instance, you might be good enough to pull the shoulder roll off in certain fights. Other fights, we're gonna just keep it simple. So I think there's no problem with a fighter who works on it for the rest of his career, but he has to be smart enough and his coach has to be smart enough to know you could do it against this guy, you could do it against that guy, et cetera, et cetera. You should never put yourself in a box and say, never do that, never try that, never work on that. Because it's like, listen, how are you ever going to get better at something if you don't work on it? So I think that a fighter, if they want to learn how to shoulder roll, they should work on it for the rest of their career. Honestly, just work on it. But also be smart enough to know who you can and who you can't pull that shit off with. And I just think that, listen, Floyd Mayweather's shoulder roll is one of the best shoulder rolls you're ever going to see in history. But there's a lot of other fighters who did the shoulder roll, not as good as Floyd, but they did it for their particular level. So the shoulder roll is a technique every fighter could use, but it just depends on the level of opposition you're dealing with, whether you should use it or not. It's just like being aggressive. You got certain fights where fighters get aggressive and they'll go knock a guy out. But then there's other fights where they're not so aggressive. He's like, what happened to all that aggression? They knew who they could be aggressive with. They know who they can't be aggressive with. So therefore, you play the game accordingly to your opponent.
Yeah, it's a very good point, mate. Because I mean, I've studied so many fighters, and if you go back, 40s, 50s, and before that, a lot of guys they were using in the US, they were using the style of fighting which is very similar to the shoulder roll. They were catching, parrying shots, turning that shoulder for the right hand. So, but again, not all of them were world beaters. So it's precisely the point you raise. You're totally right there. Well,